let's go ahead, and what I'm going to be doing, and this is what you're going to be seeing every week. What we have done is we're following a plan. We're following a, you might say, a trajectory, moving from last week where we introduced the entire rubric of this historical critique. And one of the things and one of the problems we're having, and I'll introduce it again in this talk today, one of the big problems we're having, those of us who are working with Muslims, is that whenever we get into a discussion with Muslims, whenever we get into a debate or any type of panel interaction, almost invariably, in fact, I would say almost entirely, the material that we're getting from Islam is coming from the much later 9th and 10th century traditions. And the Islamic traditions are really all that they have. It's the only narrative they're familiar with. It's the only narrative any of us have had, because it's the only one that's taught. And because of that, much of what we're coming up with now, much of the new research that we're going into, especially concerning how Islam began, concerning also how the Quran was written, or who wrote it, or when it was written, and also concerning how Islam really formed into the religion we now know today, the religion that has all these rules and regulations, all these, what we know as Sharia law, all these, this entire package known as Islam. When we look at the 7th century over here, when we look at the very beginning, when we look at the century that this was all supposedly happening or emerging, we don't see any antecedents for it. We don't see anything there that we can hang on. And that's why it's been a real tussle for those of us in the historical critique, because we're talking on about two different narratives, two different time periods, and there's an awful lot of contradiction between the two. So what we are doing, and this is why we're doing these 5 lectures, these 5 lectures all take a different category in that historical critique. And we're asking not what happens in the 9th and 10th century. We want to know what's going on in the 7th century, when it all began, when it all emerged. Well, the more we start going back to the evidence that's on the ground, and everything we're doing is following the evidence that's on the ground. We don't want to look and see what someone's theories are, or what someone surmises, or what someone believes happened from the 9th and 10th century redacted to the 7th century. We want to know what's actually happening in the 7th century. We want to know what's going on, and when these events are happening. Who is this guy named Muhammad? What did he do? What did he say? Did he actually live there? Did he live that far south? Is there another Muhammad? Could we find some possibly this name in other sources? Are there other references to Muhammad? And is he the same Muhammad that's in the traditions? What about Mecca? Did that city exist? Was it there? Can we look for it? Can we see references to it? Is it on a map? These are the questions that we should be asking, but we're not, because we're so clear that everything we're looking at is this 9th and 10th century narrative. And that's what we've done now with the Qiblas last week. Today, then, we're going to move into a whole different area. Today, we're going to do the same thing, but I'm not going to change my paradigm. I'm going to keep the same paradigm. I'm still going to go back and say, what do we know about the 7th century? Please don't confuse me with the 9th and 10th century. I don't care dilly swat about the 9th and 10th century. I leave it over here. I don't want it anymore. It's much, much too late. And we'll show that now. In fact, I'll go right into my talk, and let's do that. So let me share my screen with you, and let's get right into it. And let's start with the first slide. Coins tell a story. Let's look at this, known as the classical Islamic account. And why should we disagree with it? Why should we ever doubt it? There's no reason to doubt this account. Well, I want to put this on a timeline to help you out to see why there's a problem with this. So let's look at this timeline here. And what you see, first of all, is that Muhammad dies in 632. Okay, that's then we'll go with that. I'm not going to dispute that right now. But then we know about his biography. So everything we know about his life, what happened, is first written by this guy here, Ibn Ishaq, 765. But it's Ibn Ishaq who actually takes what Ibn Ishaq says, and he throws out much of it and only retains that which he likes. So really, it's not Ibn Ishaq that we go to. We don't go to really Ibn Ishaq, we go to Ibn Hisham. So let's get rid of Ibn Ishaq. After him, the other one that writes a biography is known as Al-Waqidi, and he dies in 835. Then we have another genre called the Hadith. These are the sayings of the Prophet. These are much more prolific. These are much more in-depth. And the first to write one of those down is Al-Bukhari. He's given 600,000 of these akhbar, these sayings of the Prophet, and he's given the responsibility between 850 and 870, the last 20 years of his life, to decide which were authentic and which were not authentic, and he was to whittle them down and throw out that which he didn't like and retain that which he did, which he did. He threw out 98% of it and destroyed 98% of it and only left 2%, which made roughly about 7,397. So from the 600,000, he reduced it to 7,397 sayings. How did he know whether or not Muhammad said these things? Look at his date, 870. Muhammad died in 632. You're talking about 240 years later. Bukhari, from Bukhara, that is not in Arabia. That is up north of Iran. So he was hundreds of miles away and hundreds of years later, yet he seemed to know what Muhammad said and what he didn't. Obviously, there's an agenda here, but he's not the only one. After him comes Sahih Muslim, he dies in 875. After him comes At-Tirmidhi, he dies in 884. Then comes Ibn Majah, he dies in 887. Ibn Abu Dawud dies in 899, and then An-Nasai, and they're the 6 of the major compilations of the Hadith. These are what they know as the 6 canonical compilations of the Hadith: Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Majah, Dawud, Nisa. So those are 2 of the 4 genre of what we know as Islamic tradition. But there is a third and a fourth. The third and the fourth are known as the tafsir and the tahqiq. The tafsir would be the commentaries on the Quran, and the tahqiq would be the histories of all mankind. And they are first written down by this man here, Al-Tabari. He is the first one to write the tafsir. There is not a tafsir before him, and he is the first one to write down the tahqiq. Look when he died. So he died in 923. Which means all of the traditions, the Sirah, the Hadith, the Tafsir, and the Tahqiq, are over 200 years after Muhammad. And that's the problem. And that's what people aren't talking about. And that's what we need to bring into our discussion. You need to show your Muslim friends this timeline. You need to show that everything they're dependent on as to what Muhammad did, what Muhammad said, how the Quran was put together, how you can understand the Quran, and all the histories of mankind, everything they know about the emergence of Islam, about everything that's happening in the world up to Islam, about what happened in that 22-year period between 610 and 632, everything they know about everything they trust and everything they believe in is written 200 to 300 years too late. 200 to 300 years too late. Today, I would tell, not go to what the writers are writing. Don't go to the libraries. Stay out of the libraries and go to that area and do what Dan Gibson did. Go right to where these people lived in the 7th century and investigate what you're going to find. Follow the evidence, follow the trail, and see where that trail takes you. And what you're going to find that there are coins there. There are coins that existed at that time period. Why haven't we looked at the coins before? Why haven't we looked at the coins before? Now, what I'm going to introduce you from here on now, from here on for the rest of this talk, is going to look at those coins. We want to look at those coins. This is the part where we introduce the brand new material. And some of you may have had a chance to go up on my PfanderFilms site, where I went through since January. I have been going through and unpacking it, but it's been a real ride. Mainly because I didn't know about the coins. And the reason why we even have the coins is because of what happened back in December of last year. I was in London, and I was asked by my colleague, Hatun Tash, if I would accompany her to the British Museum. A new gallery had just been opened last year, and she wanted me to look at some of the artifacts that they were claiming were the first of their kind. And we came across these coins that they had on display. And one of the coins I looked at, and I saw that it was attributed to Muawiyah, and I looked at it and said, that's not Muawiyah. Muawiyah comes to power in 661, and here on the coin it had the Shahada, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, which is there is only one God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And I said, there's no way that Shahada could be that early. 60, that's almost 30 years too early. So I went back and I said to Hatu, let me look this up and let me go back and see what the numismatists say, the numismatics. And so we went back and we came back and I looked at different articles, and I just want to share some of the articles with you here. Okay, these are the ones that I have come across. Here is one that is from 1994, written by Michael Bates. And Michael Bates is probably the most scholarly person on the coins. And so he's one that I would highly recommend. He's a little out of date though, because he is writing in the 1900s, the last century. And as you can see, coins are moving straight along. the book that I've used most for this lecture is Volker Popp. Volker Popp, who writes in this book called Early Islam. He has done a major job of actually unpacking it. That he is controversial. There are some people that don't agree with him. Another one that I have really used and have been very helpful is Andrew Audie and Wolfgang Schultz. And they wrote this in 2013, and they actually gave this presentation in 2013. So it's about 7 years old. In 2014, Luke Treadwell, he's written a number of articles. This is the one that I like the best, Symbolism and Meaning in the Early Islamic Copper Coinage of Greater Syria. He has been coming out with some great material. But the two that I use more than any other are these two. And these two I just came across in January. This is Mike Markowitz, who wrote this in 2014, so it's 6 years old. And that's informative, because you might say, so it's only 6 years old. The problem is this material is coming so fast and furious that it's again revised and revised almost on a 6-month basis. This article by Clive Foss, Coins of the Two Realms, written in June of 2015 in the Aramco magazine, is a good overview of what we're going to talk about, and a good overview of some of the problems and the dilemmas. And then I got this just yesterday. Now, this one is 60 pages long, written by Tony Goodwin in 2016. And I just said, oh dear, have I gotten this before I put my lecture together, suggesting that I'm going to have to even revise what I'm going to be sharing with you today. But that's good. This is one of the exciting things about historical criticism and about looking at Islam in the 7th century. We're always going to be updating our material. We have to keep updating our material, because if we don't, then we're going to fall behind. And in some ways, this will be the next chapter, because what he is coming up with and what I'm just reading, and I just started reading this as I was preparing my lecture for today. And as I got this yesterday, it was just thrown onto my, someone sent it to me, and I said, oh, if only I'd have had this back last week, or if I had this 2 months ago, we could have really run with it. So as I started reading through all these articles in January and February, I decided, my goodness, people need to hear this. So I started putting up their findings. But what I noticed is this: in almost every case, every one of these experts, these are numismatists. The whole study of coins is numismatics. And so these numismatists were doing what all of us have been doing, and that's what we call the Islamic dance. So they're running this, they're trying to look at their information, they're trying to look at all these coins, and they're trying to impose their understanding of these coins using the traditions. They're trying to let the traditions dictate how they're to read what was on the faces of these coins, the face and the back. So let me bring up the PowerPoint again and show you the dilemma that we're up against, or that these numismatists are up against. And let's now look at the coins. So let's go ahead and introduce these coins and why they are so important. So before we actually get into it, let's look at their background. What do we know about coins? Well, we know that coins were only introduced around 600 BC by the Lydians. So what did they use before that? Well, they used usually they used weighted measure. They would use weights of gold or silver. They would sometimes just barter with objects back and forth. But coins were not really introduced until much, much later, 600 BC. So that's why we can go back and we can trace the dates on many of these, because of the fact we know when they first appeared. And they weren't just used for commerce. And this is something that most people don't realize. Coins were used by rulers of different countries or different places to show and create their identity. They didn't have TV or internet or newspapers or radio today. They didn't have that way to introduce who they were, but they did have coins. Coins were used by everybody, and everybody would be touching the coins, and they would be looking at the coins. And as they looked at the coins, they would then see who the ruler was on that coins. And that's why whenever a ruler came to power, the first thing they would do was mint new coins. Then they would have to use these mints that were already in existence. And they would then put their name or their image on that coin. That was the best way to introduce themselves to those who they ruled. So they bore images of themselves. They also would then put what religion they belong to. That's very helpful for us in this discussion, because we want to know what religions really existed at this time, certainly with these rulers. And then they also put dates, and oftentimes they would start the dates with themselves, or they would start the date with the empire that they were a part of. Now, that's why we then can see where when these coins were minted, and then follow the trajectory of their minting. They also refer to where and when they were minted. And that to me is important, putting us not only to follow the chronology, but also places of origin, because you're going to be surprised by what we're finding concerning where these mints were. Now, I just went through all the people. So here you can see, I've got it on your picture. You have Michael Bates. He's probably the kind that known as the grandfather of the numismatists, the whole numismatic enterprise. Numismatics is the study of coin. And so then you have Volker Popp, and his book is probably the best one that I have found that actually puts it from an Islamic standpoint. And he tries to look at the coins on their own. So he looks at what the coins say, and then he says, so what does that tell us about the 7th century? And because of that, he's very controversial, because he's doing what the others won't do. Because your Michael Bates or the Andrew Audis or the Wolfgang Schultzes, the Luke Treadwells, the Michael Markowitz and the Clive Rosses, also the Tony Goodwoods, all of these individuals, they cannot get away from the Islamic tradition. They cannot get away from that narrative. They don't want to get away from that narrative. They feel safe in that narrative. And that's why they're having a difficult time, because what they're reading on the coins does not jive with what the narratives say. And that's their dilemma. And Volker Popp is one of the first to actually do what every historian should do, what Gibson did vis-a-vis what King did, and also what Volker Popp is doing vis-a-vis what everybody else is doing. They're going back to the 7th century. And they said, let's forget about the traditions, let's forget about that history, and let's see what the coins tell us concerning what's happening in the 7th century. So these are great numismatists, but they are not necessarily great historians, is what I'm finding. They look at the coins and describe them correctly. Yes, they do describe them, and that's why they're a great help, because they know the languages, they understand certainly the images that are on them, the little pictures that are on them. But then they try to explain what they're finding in the 9th and 10th century, and that's where they're getting into problems. But then they have no choice, because they don't know where else to go to. They've not heard any other narrative, because there is no other narrative, unfortunately. So that's why I think we need to dispense with the Islamic traditions, as I said at the very beginning of this talk, as I said last week, as I'll continue to say even next week, and we need to go back to the 7th century. Isn't that the task of the historian? If that is our task, should it also not be the task of the numismatists? Shouldn't they also be doing the same thing? Because in a sense, they are historians. That's what they're doing. When you're looking at those coins and you're trying to decipher them and you're translating the text, you then have to put it in a historical context. And that's what they should be doing. And I mean, numismatist I know is speaking about old coins. That's their oeuvre, that's their job, that's their remit. So part of the remit is then to understand what those coins are telling us. And they lament, and this is the first thing they all say, that they cannot find coins from the Hijaz. So what are we talking about? What's the Hijaz? Well, the Hijaz is that central part of Arabia that includes both Mecca and Medina. The central part of Arabia, known as the Hijaz, where supposedly Muhammad came from, where Uthman came from, where all the Qurayshi dialect came from. This is known as that central part of Arabia, where Islam supposedly began, where Adam and Eve supposedly lived, where also Abraham actually lived. If you look at the traditions, if you look at the Quran, look at chapter 7, verse 24 in the Quran, Adam and Eve were sent down to Mecca. If you look at chapter 21, verse 51 to 71 in the Quran, Abraham was there in the Kaaba. He was living in Mecca. I had no idea until I read the Quran that he was that far south. So all of history begins and ends with Mecca and Medina, Hijaz. Yet there seems to be no coins there. If it's such an important place, why are there no coins from that area? Take a look at the map. Note where the mints are. The mints are where the coins are made. It's called a mint. In English. So look on the left, notice that all the mints, those that are circled there, the ones that have circles around them, those mints are north of Israel. They're up in Syria, in Lebanon, but mostly in Syria. That's almost 1,000 miles too far north. So can you see the mints where these coins are made do not come from the place where the empire exists, at least not what the traditions tell us. The traditions tell us the empire is down in Mecca and Medina. The traditions tell us that everything was happening there in the central part of Arabia, but that's not where the coins are being made. They're made much further north. The other ones on the right are made in Iran. Look at those names. Bishapur, Darabjir, Susa, Dasht, Arajan, Shiraz, Kavatkura. This is Iran today. This is much too far north and much too far east. So you have your Western coins and you have your Eastern coins. Remember that. That's going to come important. So you have your Western mints and you have your Eastern mints. And the Western mints, actually, the Western mints do have a completely different set of coins. And they have a huge amount of Byzantine influence on them. In fact, they are very much influenced by Byzantines. And that's why you're going to see a different category of coins from the West than what you have in the East. The Eastern ones are more Sasanian. So they would have a Zoroastrian influence. And you're going to see that in the coins. Even in the coins when there is no longer any Sasanian Empire. Okay, hold that because that is important. So what then should we do? Well, since the Islamic traditions assume that there is a well-established Muslim empire by the time Muhammad's demise, since they also assume that during the reign of the rightly guided caliphs, that's the time of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. So basically that's from 624 to 661, that 40-year period. That's the rightly guided caliphs. That empire expanded from Tripoli in the west to Afghanistan in the east. So under that rightly guided caliph empire, from the top to time to 661, all the swath of land from Tripoli in the west to Afghanistan in the east was under their control. There should be some evidence in that vast swath of lands for this empire. There should be at least coins which were minted by the caliphs. People under their authority needed coins to do commerce, and the caliphs also needed to announce their authority. So let's then look at the coins in the 7th century and see what we find. Because they do tell a story, and it's not necessarily the right story, and it's not the story we've been told, and it's not the story Muslims want to hear. But then that's why we're here. So let's start with the coins from the Byzantine North, the drachma, the pre-60. This is the first one of the coins. And when you look at the coin, you will see this is a Byzantine coin. So therefore, it is made out of gold. If you look, they ruled Turkey, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. And that's where these coins were used. So that whole part of the northern area was part of their jurisdiction. The obverse means the front side of the coin. If you look on it, you will see it's the emperor. It's actually Justinian. And then on the, he's holding an orb. And look what's on the orb. It's a cross. Then he has his two sons behind him. They are also holding crosses. The reverse side, you see the Byzantine cross on a pedestal. That's the Byzantine cross. So it's obvious that this is a Christian coin. This is it has a Christian identity. That's the precursor. That's the beginning of the coins. And here's the question that comes out. From 624 to 660, the Byzantines have now destroyed the Sassanids. That starts at the battle in 622, where Heraclius destroys the Sassanians, and then he helps the Lakhmids and the Ghassanids, and they now take over. So now the Arabs have their identity, and this is the beginning of the Arab identity. Now, according to the Islamic traditions, we don't even hardly hear about that battle. That's not important in the Islamic traditions, but then the Islamic traditions are written in the 9th and 10th century. What we do hear is that Muhammad comes to power in Medina after 622. And then by 624 then, the Islamic State is introduced, and that's where you have the Treaty of Medina. That's where he then confronts the Jews, and that's why he then whittles down the Jews, and then by 627, he gets rid of all the Jews and takes over complete control of Medina. That's what the traditions tell us. You have the Battle of Badr in 624, you have the Battle of Uhud in 625, and then you have the Battle of the Trenches in 627. By that time, there are no more any Jews, and the Ansar, which are the native Arabs, they then come under his jurisdiction. He then introduces the Constitution of Medina, and he takes over then complete control. That's 624. If that is so, then what happens next? Well, then he starts moving out, and you can see, if you look at the Maghazi documents, if you look at the Sirah of Ibn Hisham, and the Sirah especially of al-Waqidi, you will see that he starts conquering all these neighboring areas, and he moves out and completely conquers them. You have 29 that he actually participates and 33 that he actually plants. So he expands his kingdom enormously. By the time he dies in 632 and Abu Bakr and Umar come into power, from 632 up until 644, from 632 about 644, that time period is where you have the great expansion. And they start moving out right across North Africa, and they move up way up to the north, up into Syria and to Jordan, and they take over parts of Iraq, and they're starting to move west from Tripoli in the west all the way to Afghanistan in the east. All of that land is under their control. Now that they're under control, what is the first thing they should be doing? They should be minting coins with their pictures on it, with their image on it. They should be introducing themselves. We can't find anything. We can't even find any inscriptions. There is no reference to any of these caliphs. They're not on any building. They're not on any book. They're not in any document. They're not on any inscription, no rock inscriptions, and they're not on any coins. Nothing about Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, or Ali. They don't exist anywhere. And this is why Muslims who say we're arguing from silence We're now saying, no, we're not arguing from science because now we have the coins. The coins are not silent. They are evident. They exist. They don't disintegrate. They don't deteriorate. That's the brilliant thing about coins. They're as pristine today as the day they were minted, 1400 years ago. And they do not have any reference to any of these caliphs. Yet these caliphs were coming into power. They should have been minting these coins. The mints already existed. Those mints were already there. They were there all over Iran. They were there all over Syria. Far, far north, true, because that's where the civilizations was taking place. So why didn't they mint their own coins and introduce themselves? Was this due to negligence? Were they not sophisticated enough? Listen, they didn't have to even create the mints. The mints were there waiting for them. The people who ran the mints already were there, were under their jurisdiction. Like everything else, there simply are no extant records from that time at all, including coins, though Muslims claims they were. And that's why the Muslims keep on saying, well, we do have the Quran at the time. Even the Quran, we're going to destroy that one next week and the week after. So hold on to that. I don't want to get into that right now. And this fact in and of itself is curious if the Islamic traditions are correct. So let's look at a map there, just so you understand what I'm saying. Take a look at the brownish area down and south. That's the area that existed up until the time of Muhammad. So when Muhammad died, that was the area that Islam controlled, and a little bit over there in Oman. Now they controlled all that swath of land. So you might say almost all of what is today Saudi Arabia would have been under their control. By the time he died, up until the time of the end of the right-heel guided caliph, you had all the orange area. So look at the orange area, territory added by the 4 caliphs, 632 to 661. So it goes from Tripoli in the west all the way to Herat, Afghanistan in the east. That's a huge swath of land. And that includes Iraq, that includes Iran, that includes Syria, that includes Egypt, and that includes what is today Libya. Okay, so you can see that's an enormous amount of land. All of Arabia and all of those countries were under their control. So if that is the case, where are the coins to support this? Where are the coins that support these different caliphs? Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Why don't they have anything in their names? What coins do we have? Well, in about 640 to 660, you get these coins. I'm just going to show you 2 from each area. There are many, many more that I could show. But take a look. Look at the front part of this coin. This is what we know as a Byzantine proxy state. So these are the coins in the West. And in the West, the coins that were minted there are copper coins and golden soliduses. So they're either made out of gold or copper. In the East, in the Iranian mints, they mint mostly silver coins. They had some copper, but most of their coins are silver. So in the Western Hemisphere, which had much more influence from Byzantine era, you have both copper and gold. And these new leaders do mint their own coins, and they put their images on them, but there's no reference to any of these Muslim names on these coins. What's interesting, they have a cross. Look at this coin here on the left. Look where the 2 red squares are. Notice on his staff, he has his scepter, he has a cross, and he also has a cross on his head. Could be, we don't know. It could be this is Constance II. We don't know. So they're giving allegiance to the Byzantines. So these proxy states are not Muslims. There's nothing about Islam in them. There's nothing about anything to do with Muhammad or anything to do with Abu Bakr or Uthman or Ali. These should be the times when Uthman and Ali and Abu Bakr should have their names on these coins. Nowhere on any of the coins do you find any of these caliphs. On the back side, there's the letter M, which is the Greek number for the denomination of the 40 Numi. So Arabic was not even used. This is still Greek, and there's a cross above the M, proving that these are Christians who were living at this time in that area. So nothing there has to do with Islam. These were categorically Christians. Then we have other coins. And these are interesting, but there's very few of these, and they're much more crudely made, which seems to suggest they're made by independent rulers, small independent rulers. On the front side, the obverse, here is the same coin as in the previous slide, but the crosses have possibly been removed from above the head and from the scepter. On the back side, the cross is also removed, and above the Greek number M, or maybe it's just damaged, we just can't see it because it looks like it's been cut off there. But what possibly this could suggest is that there is a movement now away from Byzantine Christianity here in the West and towards a new Arab identity, which makes sense, as we're going to find Mel and Murad, what they're finding now in Iraq and what they're finding in Jordan, what Gibson is finding in Jordan. What we're now finding is there was an Arab identity that was introduced in 622 when Heraclius destroyed the Sassanians. and gave them pretty much their own hegemony, gave them their own autonomy. Once that Arab identity comes to the fore, it would stand to reason that they would try to get away from underneath or any influence from Byzantine Christianity in the north. What is interesting is there's nothing Islamic in any of these coins. You notice that there's no reference to anybody called Muhammad or the Caliph Abu Bakr or Uthman or Ali from 640 to 660. And then you get the Umayyad, and here's where the coins really become a lot more sophisticated. And it's Muawiyah that really introduces the best coins. And here are the gold solidus. Here's a gold solidus of his. It is introduced in 661, but it continues to be introduced up until 680. So Muhammad dies in 632. Now we're talking about for 50 years now. This is actually for the last 20 of those 50 years. You can see on the front side, it's a gold coin, it's a solidus with a picture of the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. So here is Muawiyah in the West giving allegiance to Heraclius. Why in the world would he give allegiance to Heraclius and his son if he is now a Muslim and he has nothing to do with Christianity? Notice that? On the back side, you have a Latin inscription in the Byzantine cross. Why would it be Latin? Why is it not in Arabic? Minus the cross piece at the top. Thus, the coin was boycotted by Christians because the majority of his people that were under his power were Christians, proving that this was still very much a Christian environment, not an Islamic environment, which completely confronts what the traditions are telling us. So why would Muawiyah show a Christian emperor and his son and not himself on his coin? And notice the coin is still not Islamic. Now, because of that boycotting by the Christians, he then minted this coin. And here's a copper one. This is a copper, so it's a much lesser. And there's the 40 Numi on the reverse side. On the front side, Muawiyah went back to a picture of a faceless emperor this time with a cross above his head, showing that either he is a Christian or he's giving allegiance to Christianity because of the power of the Byzantines in the north. Either way, he is not a Muslim. There's nothing Islamic about this coin. Nothing. Why does Muhammad need to show him placate the Christians if the Arabs now control Damascus? Remember, they're way up in Damascus now. The Byzantines are they're up in Turkey, and he's there in Damascus. That's where his political power is. That's where his seat is. That's where he's now basically in control. And why is it he doesn't have anything Islamic on his coin? Up all the way till 680, nothing Islamic. Over in the east, meanwhile, you have these Sassanian coins starting to appear. This is coming out of Iran in 661, again, under Muawiyah. And here you have an Arab Sassanian anonymous bus on the margin. It reads, Ilah, or unto Allah. Now remember, be careful. This doesn't mean it's Islamic, because everybody used that word Ilaha. Ilaha is the Nabatean name for God. All the Arabs then incorporated that name. Arabic, which was now coming into its own, was beginning to take on its roots. It now had no other name but Allah. It was a Nabatean God. It is not an Islamic God. And then on the right, take a look on the back side, and this is what gives it away. Look at the Arab Sassanid fire altar with attendants with the mint name Daragir, which is in modern-day Iran. What? If these were Muslims, what were they doing putting a Zoroastrian fire altar on the backside? So in the east, they were still Zoroastrians. In the west, they were Christians. They were not Muslim. Allah's name now appears on the Umayyad coins. This is not surprising, as this name would have been borrowed from the earlier Nabatean name for God, Ilaha. All Arabs use the name Allah. Both the Christians and the Zoroastrians would call their God Allah, because that's the Arabic name for God, which is now coming through that Arab identity that started to appear in 622. This is Muawiyah's coin here, and on the front side, in 663, introduces this coin, written in the Middle Persian, Muawiyah, Amir, Urishnikan. That means Muawiyah, commander of the faithful. In the margin, there is the Bismillah, in the name of God. On the reverse side is a typical Arab Sassanian fire altar with attendants in the mint name Darabgir, once again, there in Iran. So it shows where it comes from. You can see his image, and there you can see the name, in the name of God. Again, Allah, that is the Arabic name for God. Now, instead of writing simply unto Allah, Mu'in then adds in the name of Allah. You might notice also the moon and stars are there emphasized. Now, people have come back to me and they said, oh, that proves that that's Islamic because the moon and stars. No, it is not. The moon and stars is a Sasanian symbol. It existed since the 2nd century BC. It was to show royalty, and that's why it has always been, as a Sasanian symbol, a Persian symbol. This is not an Islamic symbol. In fact, the Islamics only incorporated under the Ottoman Empire this moon and star. That was only incorporated in the 1300s, in the 14th century. already much too late. So don't get confused by that. That is not Islamic, even though some Muslims have tried, some people have tried to point that out to me. Then you have this coin that was coined in 667 by Mu'awiyah again. Remember, he's the first of the Umayyad Caliphates. He is part of the Sufyani family. On the front side, you have Bismillah Allah Malik. So in the name of God, the king, referring to himself. So he is now coming in the name of God. On the reverse side, a typical Arab Sasanian fire altar in attendance, and the mint again, this time in Bishapur in modern Iran. So that's just west of the Ragbir that we saw. So these are still mints far north, not in the south. They are not anywhere where this should be. These mints should be down in the Hijaz. They're way up in Iran or they're way up in Syria. The sequence starts with unto Allah, then Mu'awiyah adds in the name of Allah, and here he adds the king. Yet there is still no reference to Muhammad's name or anything Islamic about this coin. And this is now 667. It's not till we get to this coin. And this is the coin that finally introduces something Islamic. And look at the date, 692. Now, this is something that both Bates, Walker, Miles, Foss, and Islamic Awareness, they all agree on this. Everybody's agreed on this point. Even Islamic Awareness has agreed on this point, that this is the first Islamic coin. This is the first coin that you could probably suggest is Islamic. On the front side, Abdul Malik, who comes to power in 685 and rules up until 705, he pays homage to Justinian II, who is ruled from 669 to 711. So he's still paying homage to the Byzantines using this gold coin, and they go to war because of this. Because what does he do? He takes off the crosses. There are no crosses. So he's taking off the cross. This is like the coin that we saw earlier of Justinian II. It's a mockery against Justinian. He's mocking Justinian, the Byzantine emperor, and he puts their image with his two sons on either side, but he takes off the crosses from the orbs and he takes off the cross from his head. And on the back side, he puts a globe there, replacing the Byzantine cross, and inscribed on it is Bismillah illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. In the name of God, there is no God but God alone. Muhammad is the messenger of God. There is the Shahada. This is the first time we see the Shahada introduced on any coin. So this coin is the first to introduce Muhammad. It is definitely Islamic, but is it really the first to do so? And this is something that people are disputing me with, and I have to therefore look at these other ones. Here you have Clive Foss and also Islamic Awareness. They put together and they're saying, no, there are earlier coins that have the Shahada on it. And they're looking at this coin from 685 under the authority of Abd al-Malik. So it's still under Abd al-Malik's control. It's still in one of his coins. And over in the East, these are Eastern coins. So these are the ones that are minted in Iran. And it says Muhammad Rasulullah, Muhammad is the messenger of God in the top photo. In the bottom photo, you have Islamic Awareness also points out that it has the Bismillah, the Muhammad is the messenger, and then of course in green and that you see on the left side. So these predate the Shahada coin from 692 by 7 years. So could it be that this is where Muhammad is introduced to the world? Well, I would suggest the fact that these are from the East, from what is today Iran, what was then the Abbasid or the Persian area, not the Abbasid yet, but the Persian area, that's why these were minted at that time, because they're far away from the Byzantines. This is all far, hundreds of miles away in the East, and that's why Abd al-Malik, because it is under Abd al-Malik that these would have been minted. He's trying it out to see what would happen once he introduces it. And it's then in 692 that he then introduces it on the gold solar disc from the Syrian mints. That would therefore suggest that he was now confronting the Byzantines head on. The Numisda site and the Numisbid site, two big sites that sell coins, dispute actually what Islamic Awareness and Foss are saying. They say no, that these coins are dated to 695 and 692. So you have a dispute even amongst the numismatists as to what the dates are for these silver coins. If that is the case, then they post-date both Foss and Islamic Awareness by 7 to 10 years. The significance is that Ibn Abd al-Malik, who introduces Muhammad sometime between 685 and 692. That's what's important. It is he that introduces these coins. Whether or not he introduces them in the East in silver and then in the West in gold is up to a query. But the point is, when he introduces the 692 coin in gold, that causes a huge reaction by the Byzantines. And they go to war with him. They go to war with him. And as a result, he then introduces this in 693. Because they go to war with him, because they're so upset with what he has done, he basically just thumbs his nose at them and introduces this coin In 693, a year later, on the front side, you see Abdul Malik's image with a text reading, "The servant of God, Abdul Malik, commander of the believers." On the back side, you see a staff with the globe, again, mocking the Byzantine globe. And inscribed around it says, "La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah," there is no God but God alone. Muhammad is his messenger. So therefore, he now introduces both a gold coin and a copper coin. Those two were introduced in 693, and they continue to be introduced up until 696. So whose image is there on the front? That is Abdul Malik's image. He puts his own image with a sword. This is a statement of war. Whenever you have the sword clasping the handle, that is a statement of war. He's basically mocking the Byzantines. He says, now we are the new men in town. Now we are the new people in town. And what does he do in the same time period? He then builds the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Remember last week, we talked about this. He builds the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, the largest structure of its day. It's not facing Mecca, it's facing Petra. It sits on the hill looking down over the Church of the Sepulchre, which is the sanctuary for the Byzantine Christianity. So he's saying he's doing a one-upmanship on the Byzantine Christianity, and then he introduces on the inner ambulatories, those two inner ambulatories, those you can look at the inscriptions, they are all attacking Jesus Christ. You have Surah 4, Ayah 171 there. You have Surah 112 that attacks his divinity, attacks the Trinity, attacks his sonship, and attacks his begetting. Those four areas, they're all attacking Jesus Christ. So he not only introduces it on the Dome of the Rock, he introduces this confrontation of Byzantine Christianity right there on his coin so that everybody can read it, so everybody can get a hold of it. He now is categorically attacking the Byzantines. And what he is doing, he's putting his own image on it. These gold and copper coins replace the earlier ones. Now only Abdul Malik is pictured as a servant of God and commander of the believers. Note, an image is still included, yet we thought that you cannot have images on coins. Obviously, at this late date in 693, images were fine. So this is something that is not something that was introduced by Muhammad, or as Islamic traditions claim, was introduced in 632. It's still being used in 693, 60 years later, proving again that the Islamic traditions are incorrect. But then we need to get to this coin, because this is the mother lode. This is the one that really hits it, and this is the one which everybody now uses today. This is the coin that is still being used today, and it was introduced in 696 by Abdul Malik. On the front side, it says, "La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah." There is no God but God alone. He has no associates. Who's that attacking? Who is the one that's associate of God in chapter 5, verse 72? That's attacking the person of Jesus Christ. God cannot have an associate. He has no partners. Associate, sharikala is the word in Arabic. On the margin of the front side, it has Muhammad is the messenger of God whom he sent with guidance and the religion of truth. So it's now saying we are the religion of truth, that he might make it prevail over all religion. So now he's saying we are the best, we are the greatest, we're going to prevail over everybody else, even if the associators are right. Who are the associators? They are the Christians, because they have associated another with God in the Trinity in the person of Jesus Christ. So it's saying that we are now the new men in the block. We are now the new religion. We are going to basically prevail over all religions. On the reverse side, you have God the One. There is the statement of Tawheed, God the Eternal. He did not beget and he was not begotten. That's attacking John 3:16. That's attacking the Bible. That's attacking the person of Jesus Christ, the begotten Son of God. On the reverse margin, in the name of God, in the year it was minted. So here the significance. This coin not only introduces Muhammad, but it attacks Jesus' divinity, it attacks John 3:16, and it supports Islam's superiority. And the images no longer exist. From 696, no more images are permitted. So this idea of iconoclasm was not introduced till the time of Abdul Malik, and not introduced till a good 10 years into his reign. He started in 685. Here he is in 696. He finally then takes off his own image and he introduced that which now is part of the Quran. Those references are now in the Quran. But these predate the Quran. Isn't it interesting? Because the Shahada that you see here is not like the Shahada in the Quran. He has no Sharikala. There is no Sharikala in the Quranic text. That is only introduced on the coins, and it's introduced on the Dome of the Rock. In 697, then, he introduces the same coins in the East, on the silver. Remember, in what is today Iran. On the front side, there is no God but God alone, like the one in the gold coin. He has no associates. That's attacking Christianity. There on the margin, it's Muhammad is the messenger of God, whom he has sent with guidance and the religion of truth, that he might make it prevail over all religion, even if the associators or even if they get angry. So we don't really care about you Christians. Even if you do get angry, we're going to keep to this context. On the reverse side, it's God the one, God the eternal. He did not beget and he was not begotten, and there is none like unto him. Reverse, in the name of God, in the year is written. So this coin also, like the gold solar disc that was introduced in the western part of his empire, now in the eastern part of his empire, he introduces Muhammad and attacks Jesus' divinity, John 3:16, Allah's uniqueness, and in Islam's superiority. Why a year later? Because he first had to come out with this broadhead right there in the western part, because that's where Byzantine Christianity was at its greatest. And then he confronts it and introduces it. And from this time on, from 697, both the gold solar disc and the silver coins only have script, no longer any images. So what are my conclusions? Well, prior to 660 AD, all early coins show a clear Christian identity on both sides of the coin. And then from 624 to 660, early Islamic coins just simply do not exist. Why? Since they control so much land. This is curious. There should be an enormous amount of coins that give us names for Abu Bakr and Umar, Uthman and Ali. We just don't see them. From 640 to 660, some Arab proxy states seem to be Christian, and others seem to want no religious symbols. And then from 661 to 680, Mu'awiyah retains his Christian symbols up to 680, and then he adds Allah's name, but not Muhammad's, curiously. And then in 692, Abdul Malik introduces Muhammad. This is where it really comes in, from 692. It could be 687. That's fine. I'll go with the 692 because this is the first one that goes internationally. This is the first one that really goes so the Byzantines see it. So this is the first Islamic coin, though the date is disputed. In 693 to 696, you see this is truly an Islamic coin, but images are still kept being used, in this case, the image of Abdul Malik himself. And it's in 696, so the end of the 7th century, Arab script, in the Arab script and only in the Arab script, introduces Muhammad again, attacks Jesus' divinity, attacks John 3:16 and his begottenness, and also shows Islam's superiority. So while Allah's name is introduced early, it's an Nabatean, Muhammad's is not. He's uniquely Islamic. Doesn't the numismatic evidence support the archaeological and documentary evidence? What am I saying here? Well, you're going to find this out in 2-3 weeks. In 3 weeks, we're going to go right into the other documentary evidence. We're going to look at the inscriptions, the rock inscriptions. We're going to show you what we now know about these supposed letters by Muhammad. We're going to debunk every one of them and show you that these letters do not exist from the 7th century. They are only introduced in the 14th and 15th century. We're going to look at also the maps. We're going to look at the timeline. We're going to show you what we now know about who Muhammad is. We have now found Muhammad, and he is not the Muhammad of the traditions. He is a Muhammad out of Iraq. His name is Muhammad. He did exist. He did live. He was a king, but he's not the guy that we see in the Islamic tradition. So that name does exist. We're also going to show you where Mecca, we now know where the original Mecca is. We've just found that out in the last 2 weeks. And we know where it exists, and it's way up north, up in Edessa. It's in Turkey. So Muhammad's in Iraq, Edessa, and the original Mecca is up in Turkey. And then we're going to show you, and we're going to put it all together by saying, what now can we say about what Islam did finally introduce? Because the Islam that we have today is not from the Umayyad period. It's not even from before that period. It doesn't really get introduced till after 749. Islam that we know today gets introduced after 749. And that's why when you look at a timeline, they are all so late. Nothing comes into existence as far as his biography until the 9th century, till 833, as far as his sayings until 870, as far as the interpretation of the Quran, and also concerning the history of mankind until the 10th century. And as we're going to see next week, the Qurans that we have in our hand today are not even from the 7th century. The Qurans we have in our hand today, the Qira'at in the Ahruf, only begin to appear in 736. That's 100 years after Muhammad. And they are not the Qurans that we have today. They are many different Qurans, but that's for next week. That's for another lecture. Thus, these 7th century coins confront the traditional 9th to 10th century Islamic narrative on every point. We've got the wrong people at the wrong place doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. It looks like we've got the wrong man who should be there all over these coins. So should the caliphs be all over their coins. They're nowhere to be found. Fascinating stuff. Now we cannot say that we are arguing from silence, folks. And you notice, we're not arguing from silence. This has nothing to do with science. We now have the coins in our hands, and these coins cannot be disputed. They are pristine. They are certainly the same coins that were minted. We still have them today, which makes my job an awful lot easier, and it makes your job an awful lot easier, because all you need to do is start with the coins. We're going to show you next week, then you go to the Kiddush. We're going to show you the week after that, then you go to the manuscripts, and then we're going to show you the week after that, then you go to all the inscriptions and all the other material that's now coming to play, some of it even coming in the last few weeks. By another 3 weeks, we'll even have more material to be able to introduce. Okay, I've done enough talking. It's now over to you. Let's go ahead and find out what your questions are, and let's see if we can answer them as best we can.